Now, Rishi Sunak is under mounting pressure to investigate bombshell claims that his party covered up alleged rapes by a Tory MP.
Senior figures on all sides at Westminster have demanded an urgent inquiry into allegations that the Conservatives sat on these sexual assault claims for years. It's just one of the revelations made by former Minister Nadine Dorries in her tell-all book, The Plot, which was serialised ahead of publication. Today, she claims the campaign to undermine Boris Johnson was fuelled by his closest advisers amid fears he would be too difficult to control. Joining us now is the Spectator's political correspondent, James Heale. James, this is extraordinary because the Tory party is like, oh, we did everything right, yes, no problem. Well, as I understand it, what Nadine Dorries is saying, I should lay our cards on the table. She is a fellow TalkTV presenter, of course. Catch her every Friday at 8 p.m. What she's saying is that Jake Berry, the then Tory chair, saw these allegations. It sounds like he sort of did the right thing, got in touch with the police, wrote to the police, but that's the last that we heard of the affair. Nothing else has happened, apart from the fact that the Tories seem to be conceding that the alleged victim of this alleged rape was then sent to the Priory Clinic for treatment, for therapy, paid for by the Tory party. So we are 2 years on from a very serious allegation of rape, and nothing seems to be happening. Why has it taken so long for the Tory party to get to grips with something they should have been to grips with 2 years ago?
Well, there's two real dimensions to this story. Jake Berry became Conservative Party chairman in September of last year. According to what he said in this letter, which has then been obtained by the Mail on Sunday, he served in this role for about 8 weeks. During that time, he discovered that the Conservative Party had been allegedly paying for treatment for one of the victims of this MP in question. Jake Berry then, according to the paper, then wrote to the Metropolitan Police outlining this concerns, these timeline. Jake Berry then leaves central office in the reshuffle that follows Liz Truss replacing Rishi Sunak. But in December of last year, the beginning of December last year, The Sun and TalkTV together broke the news that a letter had gone in about one MP, concerns about sexual assault. And so that story was known about. What's come about this weekend are the concerns, the claims that the Conservative Party may have known about this and covered it up for a long time before that. So although we were aware that party bosses had written to the Met Police alleging them of concerns, the question is, when did the Tory party first know about this? And as you say, there's this element here, which is that they were apparently paying for the victim of the MP in question, and therefore there'll be receipts to this. So the key question is, who knew what and when?
I mean, who knew what and when seems to be a bit of a common narrative of what we've learned so far from the serialisation of Nadine's book. And this idea that there are some pretty shadowy operators in the Conservative Party, at the very least garnering compromat, garnering records of scandals and potentially even using certain events to blackmail, coerce and have leverage over individuals within the party. We've already seen certain things emerging over the course of the last couple of years with accusations of sexual harassment, a number of allegations against sitting Conservative MPs, a number of them who have had to step down. And of course, we all know about the faction fighting that's gone on within the party. That was on full display all last year during that ridiculous leadership campaign. Is this a party that essentially cannot manage itself internally?
I don't think it's a problem unique just to the Conservative Party. I think that, of course, you cast your mind back a few years, Labour had a real problem involving anti-Semitism allegations. As I understand it, there's an ongoing case around data protection involving some of the former staff of Labour HQ. So I really don't think this is consigned to just one party. What there is, of course, a long-standing issue involving certain MPs, a minority of MPs, and their behaviour in and outside Parliament. Now, a few years ago, the Conservative Party actually did overhaul its investigations process, and this was a process which was one of the whole issues involving the Peter Bone story, which is that because the Parliament and the party as well had reformed their structures, it meant that these complaints got lost in the process over the past 10 years. In this case, as you say, Alex, there seems to be a case whereby there were concerns about the press getting hold of these stories, and therefore they weren't investigated to the full extent. And I think what this one is quite exceptional is the severe nature of the claims, the gravity of the claims involved. And as according to Jake Berry, certainly, there seems to be a case in which laws have been broken here, and sexual assault, obviously, rape, very, very serious crimes indeed.
How is Nadine's book being received generally in Westminster? There's this kind of sense that this is the ultimate nightmare for the old public school boys network. You know, the men who really run things behind the scenes and who feel that they're in charge. Their worst nightmare is a girl from a council estate who's lobbed a grenade into their cosy little world and exploded it. Is there a sense of trepidation in Westminster now that Nadine has outed the way it really goes over there?
Yeah, well, I think that there's a real sort of mix of opinions depending on who you talk to in Parliament, really. I mean, obviously, those who are never huge fans of Nadine, to be honest with you, and so therefore they're not too surprised by her making these claims go public. But I mean, people want to know what's next. I mean, of course, on the first day we saw allegations involving the shadowy number 10 fixer apparently doing a mafioso-style killing of a pet rabbit. Now we're led to be told about potential allegations of sexual assault being hushed up. So I think that we don't know what's going to be next. And of course, the book actually comes out, I believe, on Thursday. So you presumably think you've got 3 more days of serialization. So we look forward to seeing what she has to come up with. I think there's 2 real elements to Nadine's book. One is the specific complaints involving individuals, which I think are quite probably more the ones which are more newsworthy and kind of people have set up and taken notice. The other is some of the complaints around, you know, the way in which people brought down Boris Johnson. And I have to say, I was talking to one Boris Johnson ally who was with Boris before he entered in Downing Street in number 10 in 2019. And he said, well, we spent most of the year before that trying to get Theresa May out in number 10. So I think there's a bit of, you know, politics involves a bit of skullduggery on all sides, really, and no one's hands are completely clean. That said, some of the allegations she's put forward in this book are really quite shocking and ought to be investigated.
I'll tell you something, if this character, we know who we're talking about, actually did do that to the rabbit, cut it up and banged it onto a front door of an ex-girlfriend, then I'm going to call the RSPCA. I want an investigation. I mean it, I really do. That's a terrible example of animal cruelty.
Of course, yeah.
But do you recognise what Nadine is saying about the plot to oust Boris? Is this real? Because she sort of says that the moment he came into the picture, the moment it was clear he was going to be the party leader, the moment it was clear he'd probably win the election, then the old boys network started plotting against him and they made his life impossible and indeed made up lies about him, the gold wallpaper, etc., etc. Was there this plot to ruin Boris Johnson?
There are certain people in the Conservative Party who never really took to Boris Johnson, even as leader. And I think that's completely apparent by some of their actions throughout the 4 years in charge. That being said, I do think that the narrative that Nadine Dorries has put forward isn't a wholly convincing one. Remember, of course, that I think why he eventually went in July 2022 was because his whole government fell apart. I mean, there were sort of 50 resignations from it. So it wasn't a sort of small coterie or minority. At that point, you could even run a government. I think also the role of the public in this, look at the by-elections that were turned against him, look at his role in episodes like Owen Paterson's resignation and then exacerbating that. So I think that you can certainly say there was a minority of people out to get Boris Johnson and never really got over the fact he became Prime Minister at the start. But equally, I think that, it's worth taking account of the wider narrative here. And of course, remembering that I think people at the end just got exasperated from that. I can understand why Nadine Dorries is putting this forward, and I'm going to look forward to reading it, and I'm sure she'll make some very good points in it. I do think, though, there's a wider story to be told here as well.
Yeah, indeed. Well, thank you so much, James Heale, political correspondent at The Spectator.